Hi, pet lovers. Thanks for joining Gina's Grooming channel, and thanks for joining us on another episode of our vlog where we discuss grooming industry subjects for aspiring groomers or folks who just want to be in the know. Welcome. Today's subject is going to be on injuries. So what happens when a pet gets injured in a pet grooming environment? I know this is a difficult subject, and I want to tell all the aspiring groomers out there, I am very sorry. It probably will happen to you. Most likely it will. And I will tell you, as I was preparing this discussion to have with you, I remembered every single injury that I was involved with. So they stick with you. So I want to say I'm very, very sorry. You have to kind of be prepared for that. The good news is that there are things that we can do, some practices we can put in place to go ahead and mitigate the chances of injuries occurring in our care. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. But before I do, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what kind of injuries you can expect to see in a pet grooming environment. And then I'm going to go ahead and talk about what needs to be done when those injuries do occur. And then we're going to go ahead and finish up with those mitigating strategies. So things we can do to go ahead and minimize injuries taking place in our care. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So before we really get in depth into the subject, I want to mention two things, kind of more business considerations that float around the discussion of injuries. The first one being pet insurance, so business insurance for pet groomers or anyone in the pet industry. This does exist out there for you, relatively cheap for the coverage that you get, but this gives you peace of mind, especially if you're working on your own. So if you're working in a corporate environment, the corporate policy will probably cover you, but if you are going out on your own, you're a mobile groomer, an in-home groomer, something like that, you definitely want to consider getting yourself pet insurance in case something bad happens so that you're covered. And then the second business consideration, just to mention, is to have a really good relationship with your local vet. You may have a vet that you know and trust that is local to you for your own pets, but make sure you consider sending an email, maybe to the hospital manager. Let them know you are here, you are grooming in the area professionally, and make sure that you keep that relationship bonded so that if something does happen, and hopefully it won't, but keeping a relationship like that alive and aware that you are a pet professional in the area will definitely come in handy, and make sure that the pet, if you do have emergency care, gets the care that it needs very quickly. All right, so let's talk about the subject at hand. So injuries. What kind of injuries do we typically see in a grooming environment? Let's start with some of the basics. Obviously, cutting a dog's nail too short and quicking a pet, causing it to bleed. You can have different nicks and scrapes. You can have brush burn. You can have razor burn. You can have cuts, very commonly on the ear, cuts on the tongue, which definitely are more severe because those have a hard time to stop bleeding. So be aware that that can happen. There are also lethal things that can happen. I can't really talk too much about that because that has never happened on my watch, but I have read articles about dogs being left in dryers with the heat on, and also people leaving dogs on tables where dogs jump off and they choke. So be aware that those things do happen, God forbid, in a grooming environment, but those are the types of injuries. Again, they range from very little to like quicking a dog to obviously lethal injuries, which I cannot speak about, but we'll talk about some of the more severe injuries that I've seen in a professional pet grooming environment and how we reacted to that. Okay, so these injuries, let's be honest, because we're having an honest discussion today, are sometimes the groomer's fault. Sometimes the groomer is not paying attention. They're having an off day. And I'm going to add that to our mitigating strategies at the end of this discussion, how we can go ahead and conquer that. But there are also situations that we have to be fair to the groomer. They're not the groomer's fault. So the biggest instance of this is when a dog is brought in matted to the skin and needs to be shaved. This obviously is not the groomer's fault, but by shaving this coat, we may be pulling up scabs. We may hit a mole. It's much, much more dangerous to use a blade on skin and coat of a dog than using a guard comb that goes through an unmatted coat. So know that you increase your chances of injuring a dog due to something that's not your fault at all. And there are different iterations that can happen where an owner is insisting or their veterinarian is insisting that you do something something, let's say pull ear hair very dramatically, which can cause an injury, can cause a dog to bleed. So do be aware and communicate with your owners if you're an aspiring groomer. Let them know that before you have to shave their pet, that is increasing the chance of nicking that pet. And if they ask why, I have given the example of, someone with facial hair, if they shave, or if you're shaving your legs, have you ever nicked yourself, and did you mean to? There are things like skin tags exist, moles exist. You can go ahead and by accident cut a mole or a growth or a skin tag while shaving, and that is no different than if you're shaving your own body as a human, as we are shaving a pet and running into things that we can't see under that matted coat. So just want to give a little bit of an excuse to the groomers out there for some of the injuries that do occur when we have to shave down a pet or do something else that we are required to do for medical purposes. Okay, so an injury occurs. So what do? We obviously have the medical part. So we have to do triage to decide whether or not this is something that can be handled in-house. And by that, so let's say we cut a dog's nail too short. If it is within reason, so not completely cut to the point where we can't stop the bleeding, that is usually handled topically, right, with a styptic powder that you'll usually see with abrasions, skin abrasions. Now, whether or not you have to take a dog to the vet is common sense, but if you are not sure, go ahead and err on the side of caution. Go ahead and call that vet that you have a relationship with. Make sure they can see you as soon as possible to deal with the injury at hand. This could be, a deep laceration, a cut. A dog could have stepped on scissors. A dog could have licked scissors and really given themselves a really, really deep cut on their tongue. So these are things that you may see in a grooming environment that may require you to go ahead and go to the vet. But before, obviously, we're going to be handling the medical issue immediately as it occurs. But while that is happening, we also need to be in communication with the owners. So I do want to say that most owners out there are very understanding. And as long as you communicate to the owner what happened, Fluffy was on the table, something startled Fluffy. She just turned her head and ran into my scissors and cut herself on my scissors, which is usually the things that do happen. It's usually not the groomer's fault. We are working with live animals. So animals can definitely be part of that and cause injury to themselves. So as long as we communicate with the owner, and even if it is your fault, you have to fess up. So that is a big rule in terms of injuries and pet grooming. Yes, it is unfortunate that they happen. We are going to talk about mitigating strategies and take those very seriously. But we do have to understand that we have to fess up. We have to be honest, even if it is our fault. I remember myself, I was cutting a teacup poodle's armpits. They were very matted, and just the angle I was going with, I had my little clippers, but just the angle caught her armpit skin, and it wasn't a severe injury. Still sticks with me. I still think about it, but just the way the skin kind of rolled up, and she definitely went to the vet, and we paid for her vet bills. I was at a corporate environment, but yes, it's an armpit. It might be a place where an owner might not look. It doesn't matter. You have to fess up. You have to be honest and say what happened. It is the 100% true rule of grooming. Never hide an injury. Just be honest with your customer, and most customers are going to understand. Now, just a note about those customers who won't understand, be prepared for that. There are clients that are, on one hand, incredibly loving and understanding. There are some clients that go off the wall if you cut their dog's nail too short. And here as groomers is another catch-22, as we're told, cut the nails as short as you can to the quick, but don't quick the dog. So of course, sometimes as we're doing the best job that we can to cut as close to the vein as possible, we're going to go ahead and quick a dog. And I've seen owners explode about that. So just be prepared for both kinds, knowing that most owners are understanding, but be prepared for those that aren't. And if you need help, get a manager involved. But the best thing to do is to de-escalate, talk to them calmly, offer to pay their bills, be ready for that, and make sure that you are open with compassion and you share your feelings about the subject as well. I find it definitely helps for an owner to see how distraught I am if an injury happens. Again, far and few between, but they have happened. So just be honest, compassionate, and communicate with the owner. Okay, so let's hope not too many injuries happen. I'm going to talk about mitigating strategies. And before I jump into that, I kind of want to talk about how many injuries should you expect? It's a horrible thing to ask. Obviously, you want to expect zero. But I'm going to talk to you guys about an environment that I managed, which was very high volume. So we produced somewhere between, in the beginning, about 10,000 appointments a year. In our heyday, we were producing up to 20,000 appointments in a year. And I will tell you that, and that was for 10 years, for my tenure there. In that time, I only saw two major injuries. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dogs pass through in that time. And I only saw two major injuries, and those injuries were not the fault of the facility or the groomer. They were just kind of flukes that happened. So be aware that a dog can kick a table or walk out of a kennel weird or something like that can happen, and there you have a major injury on your hands. So again, very few and far between they should happen. In terms of nicks and cuts on that level of volume, I would see maybe 3 or 5 a year. So not very much. I did some calculation even at the most conservative numbers of 10,000 appointments a year, and we do about 5 injuries a year. We're still talking about like a 0.04% injury rate, which is kind of unheard of in the industry. But I will say that there were some strategies that we implemented in that facility that really helped keep the pets safe. Okay, so the first one is common sense, which is documentation, especially when you're working in a team environment. So you may have your requests, but you may work on other dogs depending if someone calls in sick or, isn't available to groom a particular dog, or some people just don't even care if they just want the pool of groomers to go ahead and groom those dogs. So documenting behavior of animals is very important, such as do they jump out of a kennel when you go to reach in to retrieve them to start their groom? Another one example can be that if you touch the back end of a dog, this dog can spin around and kind of do an alligator roll because they're very sensitive for their rear end. Documenting those things and making sure that the next person who is going to be dealing with that dog and grooming that dog knows and is prepared. That way we know if a dog is likely to jump off a table and injure itself, we know what to do and how to go very slowly in those areas or to ask for help when we're going to be working on certain areas. So mitigating strategy 1 is documentation, sticking with it and making sure you read that documentation before you touch a pet. Next, a mitigating strategy is going to be rules of noises. So working in a salon, you're working with hair dryers, very loud professional hair dryers, high velocity dryers. You're also working with vacuums. You've got obviously hoses and all sorts of barking going on, water shooting out. But the most important thing to know is that what you can control, such as a loud sudden noise, should be controlled. So what we implemented in the salon that was very high volume was before we turned on an object that made a loud noise, so a vacuum or a dryer, we would announce in a pleasant voice to this room, dryer or vacuum, telling the room that before you're going to go ahead and turn something on, to go ahead and prepare yourself because the dog might be startled, might look really quickly. You might be working on a face, and that is something that you want to make sure that you prepare other groomers working on their dogs that you're about to startle them. The next mitigating strategy is awareness of your environment. So if you are walking around a grooming environment, you may not be the one who is scissoring, but make sure you're very conscious of, is another groomer, is your teammate working on a face? Is your teammate doing something that's very sensitive? Make sure that you are hyper aware in this environment and that you don't add any kind of problems to another groomer working on a pet. And then the last but not least, very important mitigating strategy is to stay sharp. Now this applies not only to you, but it also applies to your equipment. So it's a double-edged sword. Ooh, sorry, I'm going to play on that pun a little bit. But for you to stay sharp, you have to make sure, obviously, that you are in good spirits. You keep your energy the right way when working with animals, but you also want to make sure that you are not out of it. You're not zonked out. So if you're hungover or you're on medication or something like that, be very careful working with animals because if you're not sharp, you can go ahead. You're working on a live animal that's moving around. We're doing things that maybe the animal doesn't like. If you're not on your game, you have to be very, very careful. You may want to make sure that you plan in advance. Call your manager. I know this is tough because in this environment you have to be on, you have to be there, but make sure that you're responsible. Don't drink the night before you have to go to groom dogs the next day. You want to be a responsible person and do the right thing for the pets in your care. So stay sharp yourself. And then staying sharp in terms of your blades and your equipment. So in terms of your scissors, you want to keep your scissors sharp. Where I have managed, I've always made sure to pay for the sharpening for all of the groomers that work there, because a dull scissor is very dangerous. So if you have to chop 3 times to get one thing done, your scissors are closer to a dog for longer than they need to be. You want to keep your scissors sharp. You want to make sure to do cuts and remove the scissors. Okay, so be very aware. A dull scissor is a very dangerous thing. I also want to talk about keeping your equipment up to date. I have seen things happen where a clipper has a frayed cord and now you have exposed wires. You have now added a cause of potential injury to a dog because you have not maintained your equipment well. So make sure that your fine equipment, so your scissors are sharp, and make sure that your equipment, including your clippers, your vacuum, all your cables and your cords are kept in really good order so that they make sure that they don't add to the potential of injury to pets in your care. Well, okay, guys, that's about it for injuries. I know, again, a difficult subject, and aspiring groomers, hang in there. That the good that you are bringing by dog grooming and the love that you're putting into the world by creating cleaner pets and healthier pets very severely outweighs the injuries that are potentially going to happen when pets are in your care. Remember to stay sharp. That way you can always look at yourself in the mirror knowing that you have done the best that you can do yourself with grooming pets, and while they're in your care, you're going to do the best for them. Make sure that they stay safe. If you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to put them down below. We would be happy to engage with you on this subject and others. If you like this video, we really do appreciate your thumbs up. Subscribe for more like it. We will see you soon, and thank you for your time.